Hey everyone, so this is a call, and what I want to talk about in this video is I'm going to talk about semen retention, and I want to talk about what happens with your sexual energy or your sex drive when you're doing a semen retention practice. I'm hoping that to give you a little bit of tips. Sometimes there's a little bit of fear around doing semen retention, one of which is, oh my God, I'm going to be so horny, I'm going to go crazy, and I won't be able to focus. The other concern that often comes up is one's vanishing sex drive. Now, I'm going to get into this. So there's two approaches you can do when you're doing semen retention, basically. One is you can continue to self-pleasure or masturbate, right? So that is one of the approaches. Now, the other approach is to abstain entirely from any form of self-pleasure. So we're going to talk about a time frame here. Let's say it's a 1 to 2 weeks, right? So you're going 1 to 2 weeks of semen retention. You can go longer or whatever, but I'm going to kind of just sort of focus in on that particular time range. If you go a month, you go 2 months, it all applies, everything I'm going to be saying. But for the sake of this video, I focused on a 1 to 2 week semen retention program. So one of the things that, like I said, that often comes up is, what will happen with my sexual energy? Will I become crazy? The reality is, if you're doing the first approach I mentioned, which is you're still self-pleasuring, maybe. You might drive yourself a little bit nuts. If you're doing an edging practice and you're doing semen retention, what you're doing is you're creating a stimulus in that part of the body. So even when you aren't masturbating, you still have, basically you're activating the nervous system, right? So you're activating the nervous system in the genital region of the body. So in other words, it creates this vibration that just continues, right? Now, if you leave your genitals alone during semen retention, the energy will simply transmute. It goes to other things, right? So your focus changes. Now, there's benefits and drawbacks to either one. So the benefit of continuing the self-pleasure while doing a semen retention practice, and again, there's one little detail here, which is the assumption is you're doing a transmutation practice. You have some sort of coaching, which, by the way, if you're interested in sexual energy coaching, you can check out the link down below the video. I offer that. So in other words, you're given some sort of support, whether it's coaching support or group support or whatever. But again, the idea here is that if you're self-pleasuring, you will create this vibration which will continue to resonate the horny feeling. That will continue to be loud. Now, if you completely cut out the self-pleasuring, like I mentioned before, the energy simply goes off into other things. Now, it usually takes about 4 days to a week before that shift out of horny happens. Now, there's an insecurity that sometimes comes up. I experienced this myself. Most men since the age of 14, 15 were doing some sort of masturbation. So we get very, very connected to that feeling. And I often say that horny is high, right? It creates this this sort of uplift or peak in energy in a way until you release it and then you drop back down. So that's the whole idea. Horny raises the heat, and then if you ejaculate, then you drop back down. But in the case of doing semen retention, you just end up increasing the heat. There's no drop back down, which kind of sounds like it might be good, but it's not. It's not necessarily. It's not necessarily bad, but again, the assumption is you have transmutation practices you're doing. Just the stimulator edge, and then walk away and leave it alone, you might drive yourself a little bit nuts. But like I said, one of the fears that come up is that we become very connected or attached to that horny feeling. And to some degree, men, we tend to perceive like if my sex drive is high, I'm somehow more vital. I'm somehow more connected to my manliness or whatever it may be. And I'm not going to discount that and say no. Because any man who's lost their sex drive for any period of time knows that it can be kind of debilitating in a way, at least emotionally. So, but the idea here, the approach here is not that you are losing your sex drive. If you simply stop masturbating and you're doing semen retention, the energy shunts to elsewhere. you start to focus on other things in life. And you will gain a certain clarity if you do that. So let's talk about the biochemistry a little bit here. Let me go over my notes real quick to see if there's anything else I wanted to mention real fast before I go into the biochemistry. No, not really. So the biochemistry here is pretty interesting. When I was doing my research on this, I was researching. There's not a whole lot of research on this, by the way, but when I was doing my research, I was really kind of looking at a couple different chemicals, prolactin and dopamine to be specific. Now, prolactin and dopamine have this kind of antagonistic relationship. So prolactin, for instance, when a man ejaculates, prolactin shoots up where dopamine drops. Okay, so what I was kind of curious about is if one is sort of doing edging or self-stimulating in some particular way, what happens to the dopamine? Well, the dopamine does kind of go up, right? But the thing is that the reward system, in other words, the nervous system and the endocrine system, we kind of overtax the reward system in the body. And what this kind of can do is it can kind of create a feeling of like edginess or distraction or anxiety, right? So edginess, distraction, anxiety. The dopamine's not plummeting, so you may not get like the heavy brain fog, which is what happened to me when I was chronically ejaculating all the time, was this like perpetual brain fog. But what you're doing when you're masturbating and then going away, then coming back to masturbating and going away, is you're creating ups and downs with the dopamine. And again, this is taxing on the nervous system and taxing on the endocrine system. So if your preference is to simply feel even, then you can't, or you should not, manipulate the dopamine up and down through self-pleasuring, okay? So that's something I want you to kind of consider. Testosterone is another thing I kind of looked at. So testosterone, in both cases, whether you're self-pleasuring or not, does increase. However, the increase, if you just leave it alone, is higher, right? I saw one study, 145% increase. 145% increase in testosterone if you just leave it alone, right? So semen retention and no masturbation. So let's see what else. The other thing is again, going back to kind of like the dopamine thing, is the idea is if you're doing semen retention because your ultimate goal is to resensitize you to you, which in my view is kind of the point. The point is to connect the mind with the body, and part of that weaving process, it requires that our endocrine system, all of our hormones kind of come into their normal state or their balance. Most men, particularly if you've been ejaculating, daily or more than once every 2 days, your dopamine levels are never normal. So you kind of end up having this perpetual brain fog potentially. So again, I only look at this idea of self-pleasuring while doing semen retention as kind of a weaning process. It's better than ejaculating. That's the only way I can say it. However, the best approach here, and again, if your idea is to resensitize you to you, that is resensitizing you to your reward system in your brain, et cetera, et cetera. The idea here is to think about it like fasting. Any of you who've ever fasted before, what you're going to notice is, I like to do eating once a day. That's kind of fasting I do often. But what I always notice is if I do like 2 or 3 days in a row of eating once a day, usually by that second or third day, I start to smell everything more vividly. I start to taste everything more vividly. And that to me is highly rewarding. It's, I call it the orgasm of appreciation, right? So it's the orgasm of appreciation. All of a sudden, sweet tastes sweeter, right? The smells from all sorts of things start to be much more profound and rich. So again, this is what we're wanting to do if you're going to do semen retention and cut out the self-pleasure, is you're going to have the opportunity to totally reset. But I want you to, again, think about going at least 7 to 10 days minimum, right? So 7 to 10 days between ejaculations. And this way, what you're going to do is you're going to gain the benefit of the increased testosterone levels, the rebalancing of your dopamine, and other things that end up happening on and on and on. Ultimately, the experience of your body will be enhanced. And I think that's kind of the goal, right? And the other thing, one final thing I'll mention is if you reduce the constant stimulation on the genitals, you're also going to reduce some of the anxious energy that kind of goes along with sort of self-pleasuring or edging. There's like an anxiousness, right? And so if you're interested in, let's say, lasting longer during a sexual experience, one of the things you could do is you simply stop. You stop masturbating. You stop creating the overstimulating. Well, you stop overstimulating the genitals, and what it'll end up doing is it'll remove some of the anxiousness, which will then make it easier for you to last longer during sex. And there's a lot that goes into that. That's another video. So if any of you guys have any additional questions relative to this topic or anything about sexual energy, please feel free to ask questions down below the video. I'll either answer in the comments or I'll make a video about it. So again, it helps giving me something to talk about. So with all that said, thank you for watching.